Take 1. The Invention of Race, exploring the origins of our racial perceptions. Dear family, as we begin an exploration of a subject that often stirs discomfort and provokes challenging conversations, I invite you to approach this journey with an open mind and, more importantly, an open heart. Here, I've intentionally worked to create a safe space for shared growth and learning as we work together to embrace the complexities of race and racism in American society. While our perspectives may diverge, my aim is to foster a meaningful dialogue on navigating a world that privileges one group while marginalizing others. Let this space serve as a starting point for healing and growth, as together we can strive for a deeper understanding and a commitment to be and do better. So here we go. I believe that race in American society can be compared to a house built on a foundation of sand. At first glance, the house may appear sturdy and well constructed, but over time, the shifting sand beneath it causes cracks to form and the structure to weaken. Similarly, the concept of race in America was built on a foundation of flawed assumptions and false beliefs. The idea that people can be categorized into distinct racial groups based upon physical characteristics is a social construct, not a biological reality. Yet this flawed foundation has been used to justify discrimination, oppression, and inequality for centuries. Just as the shifting sand beneath the house causes it to crack and weaken, the flaws in the foundation of race in America have caused significant harm to individuals and communities. The legacy of slavery, segregation, and ongoing systemic racism have left deep scars on American society, impacting everything from the criminal justice system to the education system to housing and employment opportunities. And just as the house cannot be strengthened or repaired without addressing the flaws in its foundation, we cannot hope to create a more just society without confronting the legacy of racism head on. This requires all of us to challenge our assumptions and biases to begin dismantling the systems and structures that perpetuate inequality. The analogy of a house built on a foundation of sand hopefully serves as a reminder that the concept of race in America is not a fixed, unchanging reality, but a flawed and mutable construct. If we are to build a more unified society, we must be willing to confront the flaws in this foundation and work to create something stronger and more sustainable in its place. Now, before I go into more detail about race, I want to point out what scholar Dr. Ibram Kendi shared in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is amazing, by the way. You should definitely pick it up. He states that race is the child, not the father, of racism. In other words, the concept of racism birthed the social construct called race. Now, let's take a moment to unpack racism to provide a better context to race in America. Racism in America is a system of power, privilege, and oppression rooted in the belief that certain racial groups are superior or inferior to others. It is a deeply ingrained and pervasive force that permeates all aspects of society, from our institutions and policies to our individual attitudes and behaviors. Racism is not just about individual acts of discrimination or prejudice, but a more extensive system of structural and institutional inequalities that disproportionately impact marginalized communities. It is used as a tool of division and exclusion that reinforces power dynamics and limits opportunities for those who do not conform to dominant cultural norms. Racism in America is a complex and multifaceted issue that requires constant vigilance and active dismantling, both on a personal and a systemic level. In the tapestry of American society, we are compelled to confront the unsettling truth that racism is inextricably linked to the very fabric of our nation. We must recognize the deliberate construction of race, a social and arbitrary invention created to divide and categorize our fellow human beings. Through this lens, we begin to discern the intricate patterns of prejudice and discrimination which have been woven together for centuries, binding us to an unjust legacy. As we strive to untangle these threads, we must acknowledge the power dynamics that have been sustained by the illusion of race. The social construct of race has been a defining feature of American society since its inception. And the haunting legacy of African enslavement, the brutal displacement and genocide of indigenous peoples, and the persistent strife faced by Asian, Latinx, and other marginalized communities, race has indelibly woven itself into the cloth of American existence. The social construct of race. Race is a social construct that has been used to categorize people based on physical characteristics, such as skin color, facial features, and hair texture. This construct has been weaponized to justify systemic oppression and inequality, perpetuating a legacy of violence, discrimination, and exclusion. From the earliest colonial days to the present day, race has played a central role in shaping American society. While there are undoubtedly physical differences between people of different ethnicities, these differences are relatively minor. They do not justify the rigid categories that have been created to separate people by race. The creation of race as a social construct can be traced back to the colonial era in America, when European settlers began to interact with indigenous populations and enslaved Africans. The European colonizers needed a way to justify exploiting and subjugating these groups of people. They did so by creating a hierarchical system that placed Europeans at the top and everyone else at lower levels. This system was the way in which it amplified racial disparities rather than recognizing that people are complex and multifaceted with a wide range of experiences and identities. The categorization of race served to reinforce stereotypes and create artificial divisions between people, perpetuating racism and discrimination over time. Examples of racism in America. As we deepen our comprehension of the entwined nature of race and racism, let us now delve into the many ways these social constructs manifest within the very fabric of our society, exposing their far-reaching consequences and the urgent need for change. Slavery and Jim Crow. Many history books breeze over or completely leave out maybe the most blatant example of racism in America, the institution of slavery. Slavery lasted for centuries and was followed by the era of Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation and discrimination in the South. Slavery treated black people as property rather than human beings, denying them fundamental human rights and subjecting them to brutal and inhumane treatment. Jim Crow laws, which persisted until the 1960s, segregated public spaces such as schools, restrooms, and water fountains, and prevented black people from voting or holding elected office. Housing discrimination. Redlining, a practice that was popularized in the 1930s, prevented black people from purchasing homes in specific neighborhoods, effectively segregating housing by race. This practice denied black people the opportunity to build equity and wealth through home ownership, contributing to the wealth gap that persists today. Even after the Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited discrimination in housing, housing discrimination continued to more subtle ways, such as steering black people towards certain neighborhoods and denying them access to mortgage. Police brutality. The issue of police brutality and excessive force has been a major concern in America, particularly in relation to how it disproportionately affects people of color. Black people are more likely to be stopped, searched, and arrested by police than white people, and they are also more likely to be victims by police violence. The high-profile killings of black people such as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor have brought renewed attention to this issue and sparked widespread protests against systemic racism. But this issue continues to this day, even if it doesn't make national news headlines. Employment discrimination. People of color continue to face discrimination in the workplace, with studies showing that black job applicants are less likely to receive job offers than white job applicants with similar qualifications. Additionally, people of color are often paid less than white people for the same job and are less likely to be promoted to higher positions. According to the Economic Policy Institute, in 2020, black workers earned 74 cents for every dollar earned by white workers for the same job. Voter suppression. Voter suppression which involves tactics aimed at making it harder for certain groups of people to vote, has a long history in America. In recent years, a renewed effort has been made to restrict voting rights, particularly for people of color. These efforts include strict voter ID laws, purging voter rolls, reducing the number of polling places in certain neighborhoods, and limiting early voting and mail-in voting. In 2021, 36 states had some form of voter ID law in place. These laws require voters to present specific forms of identification at the polls, which can be difficult for some people to obtain. A Brennan Center for Justice study found that strict voter ID laws can reduce voter turnout by 2 to 3 percentage points, with the largest reductions among Black and Hispanic. Voter purges are the removal of registered voters from the rolls, often for reasons such as incorrect addresses or failure to vote in previous elections. Another study by the Brennan Center for Justice found that between 2016 and 2018, nearly 17 million voters were purged from the rolls, with some states purging voters at much higher rates than others. These tactics disproportionately affect people of color and are designed to suppress their political power. As we stand at the crossroads of understanding and action, the call has been made for us to confront the complex and enduring issue of racism that permeates the very soul of our country. Progress, though marked by milestones such as the legal dismantling of segregation and discrimination, remains but a whisper in the face of the deeply entrenched systemic racism that casts a shadow over this country. In the spirit of relentless pursuit for justice, let us continue to illuminate our ugly truths and labor towards weaving a more equitable tapestry for all, transcending the arbitrary boundaries of race that have long divided us. I believe it's possible, and I ask that you believe too, because I cannot solve this problem alone, and neither can you. Only we can. Only we. Talk to you soon. Much love, Dr. J.